Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Zero Gaming here, and we're gonna talk about our Ciela here. Enna Kros here. And before we get into her, let's take a look at Reno first, or Reno. Depends on, I don't know how you actually pronounce it in your own language, but anyway, I'm calling it Reno for now. So we're gonna talk about Reno first. Reno doesn't get too much of a rework outside having more HP dumps. His skill 1 now becomes a 2 single target HP attack with a 50% splash. And his skill 2 becomes a 3 single target HP attack. His LD now becomes a 4 AoE full HP attack, which now dispel 4 buff instead of just 1, and also improve the LD buff which provides a 20% party HP damage up. So pretty sweet, I guess. His EX now does a 3 AoE full HP attack. I mean, full is always nice, but other than that, no extra changes. His additional ability now lasts for 6 turns and has 1 single target HP attack, which extend the inflicted debuff duration by 1 and now provides a 50% self overflow and max bravery up, as well as 30% self brave damage cap up. So that's so far the only changes of Reno, nothing too fancy. Reno, the best part about Reno is actually his skill 1 debuff and his LD debuff. His skill 1s allow the enemy to self delay every time they perform a physical attack, and the debuff from his LD actually allows 1 bravery or HP attack to be mitigated. But the problem with Reno is actually the fact that both of his LD call and his regular call perform this debuff themselves. So this actually makes Reno better as a call instead of having him in the party itself, since his call already provides the best thing about having him in the party itself. So yes, I think Reno sadly doesn't get too much attention in this current era, but his FR when he comes back later will be really good, especially if you love off-turn or counter team composition. So I'm definitely going to pull Reno during his FR with my alternate account, since I'm actually thinking of building the alternate account with more of a counter main team composition. But right now I won't actually suggest going for him. He's just very mediocre in the damage department, and his utility is best used just as a call. It's not really worthy enough to have him in the party all the time. Do know that he does reduce attack from the enemy if the enemy is a physical attacker, so that should also be kept in mind. And if your team is also physical attacker, Reno can actually boost the damage of your team itself. So naturally, if you want to go for Reno, he's going to be very good with unit that actually has physical attack in their kit, like Squall, like Cloud, very prime example, or even Zac with the newest BT. But do note that even though Reno does comes really good later with counter unit, it's not really viable right now, considering that his skill 1 actually does delay the enemy, although it's self delay. But with that fact itself, it doesn't actually goes really well with counter unit in that situation. Alright, so that's it about Reno. It's actually pretty short, but anyway, we're gonna move on to Enna Kros. So to start things off, Enna Kros skill 1 is a 3 AoE Holy Split HP attack and inflict 1 frame 8 turn debuff, which has 20% defense down and Dark and Holy Imperil to all enemies. The skill also grant 1 frame buff to herself, which provides self enchant Dark and Holy Elemental, 50% self attack, max bravery and initial bravery up, and 20% overflow and self HP damage up. And one of the most interesting kit about her buff is that it actually rounds up the last 3 digits of Enna Kros bravery damage to the nearest 1000. So anything below 1000 will automatically become 1000. And for example, 9,999 will become 10,000. It will ignore any sense of bravery cap, so I guess it's a very interesting mechanism. Not that it's very overpowered or something. The maximum damage that you can get from this bonus is only 999, so I guess not too much of a big deal. But this buff also does provide her a 20% chance to fully recharge her EX gauge every time she ends a turn. So before we continue into her skill 2, her EX and her LD, I just want to say that all these 3 skills actually allow Enna Kros to summon Mecha, or we call it Omega God, to perform her attack. So this Mecha has 500% of Enna Kros initial bravery, max bravery and HP, as well as 200% of her attack, bravery damage cap and HP damage cap, basically a buttload of attack. And summoning this mecha actually doesn't consume Enna Kros bravery every time it uses a HP attack. So in that situation, you can say that Enna Kros has the advantage of retaining her bravery even after performing a HP attack. Alright, so moving on into skill 2. It's just a 2 AoE split HP attack from the mecha itself, non-elemental. So nothing too notable to talk about, but just very huge amount of damage from the mecha, especially if you have that overhead buff, which is obtainable through her EX and her LD. So her EX is also an attack from the Omega God itself. It's a 3 AoE split HP attack and deletes all the enemy turns. It is a low turn rate attack though, and it grants 1 stack of her overhead buff. So what this overhead buff provides is, when summoning mecha, the mecha will start at max bravery before performing attack. So basically this means that when her overhead buff is active, you're gonna have Enna Kros dealing a buttload of damage. The damage differences between her having that overhead buff and without her having that overhead buff is actually quite big. So I would say if you stack with a lot of HP damage cap up and HP damage up, you can see Enna Kros dealing damage that is equivalent to actually a BT finisher. But yes, that's definitely one thing to look at. Her LD also is an attack which relies on summoning the mecha to perform it. It's a 6 single target HP attack and grants her the same frame buff that she gets with her skill 1. It also grants her 1 stack of her overhead buff, although technically it's 2 stack, but she consumed 1 stack right away. So in the end, it's only extra 1 stack of her overhead buff after her turn. And this skill is also a low turn rate skill, so getting that into consideration, meaning that Enna Kros will be self-delaying herself with her EX and her LD. So the additional ability of Enna Kros is a 6-turn self buff, which provides 60% self initial bravery up, 20% self max bravery up and overflow up, as well as 30% self brave damage cap up. Note to yourself that every stats up for Enna Kros herself will be directly influencing the mecha's own stats, and since the multiplier from the mecha to Enna Kros stats is quite huge, you can say that the slightly changes in Enna Kros stats will affect the differences in the attack and the amount of HP attack dumps in this in her skill. Do also note that when Enna Kros summoned the Omega God, the mecha actually leave right after her performing that attack. So I'm not sure how the HP multiplier comes into play here. It doesn't seem to be rather important in this case, but I guess her FR might create some new mechanism that requires it to stack up, but I'm not sure how it goes. We'll see how she gets or what upgrade she gets during her lost chapter. But anyway, moving on, if you're trying to use Enna Kros, just note that she's not very hard to use. When you have no overhead buff or no stacks of her overhead buff, you just use skill 1 to upkeep her frame buff, or use her additional ability to self buff and a chance to actually proc the EX recharge, or you can even use her skill 2 as a filler if you need shaving, but do note that this won't do a lot of damage. Of course, when you have the overhead buff, do not actually waste that on her skill 1 or her additional ability. Instead, use her LD if you need to upkeep the buff, or just use her skill 2 to maximize the damage. Of course, Enna Kros EX is her main priority. Always use her EX whenever it's up, no matter the circumstances. Anyway, Enna Kros also has a very unique core ability. Both her core ability actually does provide the unique mechanism of her buff, but with different variation. Her base core has the round out mechanism, so like I said, it's not too big of a deal, but it does provide a unique situation where you actually run outdated units that might perform more than you expected. And her LD core has the 20% chance for the EX recharge. So if you want to maximize your burst damage, you want to rely on RNG for that one, it might be a very unique option to go for, especially with Crystal Level 90 era where the EX is always the hardest hitting attack. Taking an example is Noel. Since Noel based attack is not really too much of a deal, but his EX is always his strongest attack. So this LD core for him to proc his EX even in burst phase is actually quite unique, and might actually boost Noel's overall burst damage. But that's just, like I said, either a meme or just an RNG reliant skill, so not too reliable, I guess. But anyway, moving on. So what I think about Enna Kros herself, she's a very hard hitting DPS but with very slow turn rate and speed. And she requires an extensive support to actually maximize her capability itself. Like I said before, the slightest change in her stats can greatly affect the stats of the Mecha. So all those sweet HP damage cap up and bravery damage cap out is actually very beneficial for Enna Kros herself. Of course, if you want to use her, I do recommend bluing her armor, since her armor is selfish high armor, which extends her own bravery damage limit and HP damage limit up. And considering the fact that you can combine the stats with all those buffs like Garnet's or Ramza's BT plus buff, you can actually boost up the Mecha's damage a lot higher. With that into consideration, Enna Kros' best friend is of course extensive support, like I mentioned, Garnet and Ramza, and she can actually benefit really well from Ram, Arthmal and Ashe, which turn manipulate her into the front, since she has low turn rate skill like Machina, and her highest DPS damage is from on-turn damage, so she has a lot of benefit with this unit giving her the speed and the turn. And of course, if you want to avoid relying on the RNG of her 20% chance to proc the EX recharge, you can always go for a unit that provide this utility, for example Ashe, Lloyd's, or even Selfie, and of course Ram herself. And another way to actually slowly use her advantage of the slow turn rate is to run her with counter units, so she won't exactly take up too much turn and actually benefit if you're running stages like Boss Rush, although we're not getting Boss Rush any soon. But anyway, if you're running stages like Boss Rush, her slow turn rate can actually benefit a lot for counter units to get their counters in, for example Beatrix, Oren, or even Furion. As for what she's not exactly compatible, I would say that if you want to run her, you need extensive support, so any DPS, it's not really my recommendation to go for with her, since if you're running her, you want to bring more support to make her as the main DPS of your party itself. So overall, like I said, yes, very interesting unit, but definitely needs a lot of investment if you're going for her. I personally have tried her once in JP and I didn't use her a lot after that, and it's weird really, she's quite popular in the world of Final Fantasy. I guess the game itself is not as popular though, but I kind of want to abuse her more right now in global, especially when I have more units to run her with. I guess I might throw some tickets in my main account to try to get her, since I cap in the tickets department anyway, but I don't know whether or not I will go hard for her. I might be more interested to go for her FR when her Lost Chapter came, but we'll see how her FR fare first. What about you guys? Are you guys actually wanting to get her? I'm still waiting for Auron to actually comes into the game. I'm actually more happy if she's the one being introduced instead of Enna Kros, but I guess Enna Kros is still pretty cool. Depends on how you view her or him as a character. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, so let me know what your pool plan is for this banner, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers guys.